Just coming to you. Hey, I know. Yeah, check it out. I have a tie on today. What about that? This is an unusual day for me. I have a meeting. I got to take a picture, and I thought it'd be appropriate to have a tie on. I may be the only person in this picture who's going to have a tie on, but I'm certainly going to have one on. And one of those things. I got a like thing that I hang my ties on. It's full of ties. Over the past year, certainly I haven't been wearing them, and even over the past several years, ties really haven't been, part of that normal wardrobe as they used to be in the past. So anyway, if you think I look odd, I hadn't tied it all the way. I'm still, saving that neck until I really have to. But that's the deal. So it's Wednesday, April 28th. Just let me remind you of a couple of things. First of all, thank you. Thank you all for following me on social media. We're gaining momentum on LinkedIn. I'm getting more people on Instagram. Of course, those of you on Facebook Live and following my YouTube channel, thank you all for, caring about what I'm talking about and tuning in and sharing. Feel free to, and please, don't just feel free, please continue to do that. Reach out to me, let me know if I need to give you a shout out or if there's something I want to do that you want me to do, something you want me to talk about, engage with me in conversation. I'm all about that. I want to be relevant to you. And of course, from my position at the Birmingham Business Resource Center, I want to be helpful to you. And the way we do that is you engage with us and we help you grow your small business. We help you build capacity. We help you gain access to capital. And the ultimate result is what we really want to help you do is to get more customers. Let me mention GastonBusiness.com. GastonBusiness.com. That is the website for the A.G. Gaston Business Institute. If you are in business, we're trying to catalog and highlight all of the African-American businesses that we can find. And you can go on and you can enter your information. So please do go on GastonBusiness.com and go on the business directory and put your stuff in there. In recognition of Small Business Week, I'm not going to let the cat out the bag. I'll make sure I wait and we'll expose these folks next week. We got a person a day next week who's going to be awarded or rewarded or recognized. But we're recognizing small business heroes. These are people that you, the public, have had a chance to nominate and to say why they should be heroes. And we're going to be unveiling who those heroes are all of next week, which coincidentally, well, really not coincidentally, which is Small Business Week, a week that we recognize small businesses. So had a whole lot of stuff to talk about today, but stuff that happens in the news sometimes, takes me off track, and it won't let me really just focus on the things that I intended to focus on when the week started. So just to let you know, when the week started, I wanted to focus on DC statehood. And I think that's important. I think it's important that the folks in Washington, D.C., the 750 plus thousand residents of Washington, D.C., the Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, which is not a state. So it means they don't have senators, and the member of the House of Representatives, Eleanor Holmes Norton, can't vote. So that's 775,000 Americans who are underrepresented, who pay taxes but don't have the same kind of representation that you and I have, and people who live in the quote unquote 50 states. And so it is the House has passed a bill to give DC statehood. We're going to talk about this more, I suppose, but just check this out. Vermont and Wyoming have fewer people in their states, meaning they have 2 senators and members of the House of Representatives. So they are well represented. Vermont, Wyoming. I think one of them has 500,000 people. The other one has about 600,000 people. Both fewer than Washington, D.C., but they have representation. And we're going to talk about Puerto Rico, too, because I think at some point we've got to engage in those conversations. But here's the deal. The Democrats are pushing for statehood for D.C. Okay, D.C. votes overwhelmingly Democratic. I think they voted 92% for Biden. But the Democrats are going about this in an honorable, legal, constitutional way, as opposed to what the Republicans are trying to do to hold on to power. Their idea of holding on to power is to let fewer people vote. The Democrats' idea of gaining power is to get more people registered and have more people vote. Now, you tell me which one you think is the most quote unquote American way. You tell me which one you think is the Christian way. Tell me which one you think is right. And I can tell you where I stand, and I think I don't have to, because you know that something that you do legally and constitutionally, and you have votes and you let democracy work, then that's what democracy is supposed to do. It's supposed to work. And it is a system of government that is for the people and of the people. So when the people vote, then democracies listen. So anyway, I won't talk anymore about that. I wanted to also just talk about this, and I hit on this a couple of months ago. And it's something that we really should be concerned about. And that's an issue of the difference between CEO pay and the average folks that go to work for these companies and make it rain and really make it happen. Now, the CEOs should not make 300 times what the average worker makes. I mean, to me, that is, what's the word? It is not just insane, but it is really almost indecent. For an average worker to make $60,000 or $75,000 and the CEO to make 30 million, 40 million, 100 million. That is really a little bit insane. And first time I ever made that statement in public was on April 4th, 2018. I received an award from the SCLC. It was the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. And I got the Economic Justice Award, and talked about King being this drum major for justice, and talked about his quote from Amos that said, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." But I made the statement that it is not just when CEOs make 300 times that of the average worker. Well, Tim Cook, who was the CEO of Apple, was one of the recipients as well. He received an award, and he was there and he heard my comments. And I really hadn't planned them for his benefit, but it just so happened that the shoe fit, and I think his salary is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and Apple folks are well paid, but when the CEO makes hundreds of millions and you making 100,000, there's a little something wrong with that. So anyway, I wanted to mention that, and then I was all set to kind of talk about this whole foot in mouth, diarrhea of the mouth, saying the wrong thing by Rick Santorum. But here's the point. It's always bothered me that the history books that I was given in school were full of inaccurate, incomplete, and distorted information. So we've never really been, in a lot of ways, accurately informed about this nation, about its history, about the contributions of Black and brown and indigenous people. And that took place in school. That's where we were supposed to be educated. Well, Rick Santorum is speaking at the Young America's Foundation. And these are to some young people that they are, Republican leaning, because it's a Republican leaning group. And of course, the Breakfast Club dubbed him Donkey of the Day because he said that America was nothing before the Europeans came here. God, America was nothing before the Europeans came here. So I guess he failed history, obviously, and he bought into this theory that nothing of value exists before the white man touches it. I mean, that's got to be what he was saying. So I just want to remind Rick and remind everybody else that this place that we call America was inhabited by human beings, the natives, the people that God put here in his infinite wisdom, and they were not white. You know, and so we listen to Santorum. He's an intelligent man, supposedly. He's got a degree from Penn State, a degree from Pitt, a law degree from some law school in Pennsylvania. But when we listen to folks like him, intelligent, we really get a glimpse of what racism is really about. This is what that white privilege, when it comes out, you know. So we got this proclamation from white folks that they brought civilization. You know, we've seen that. We used to see it, you know, on the stories and movies when we were kids, that they brought civilization. But you know, what my reading and research has shown is that Western civilization is really synonymous with white supremacy. This whole idea of Western civilization and white supremacy are really closely akin to each other. So Santorum, this Republican from Pennsylvania, well-educated, CNN commentator, you know, all these degrees and all that kind of stuff. So he had to take history, right? You would think that he took history in school. And so to say that America was birthed from nothing demonstrates the kind of arrogance and ignorance that only racism could curate. I mean, you can't get that out of what I think a fair mind, a normal mind, a mind that doesn't have bigotry, racial animus, and this superiority complex that white people have. So Rick was being Rick. He ignored the indigenous cultures that have been here for centuries, the existence of the Aztec and Incan empires. We read about that in history. He kind of ignores this violent pillaging of 2 continents. And those are the things that only true racists can do with a straight face. And say this to young people. And the guy on Charlemagne said, so when we wonder, and we've been saying for generations, well, racism is going to die because younger people are going to come and they're not going to have these racist attitudes. But he retorted that because if you keep preaching that to young people, they're going to take it. I met a young man who was 18, very liberal, very white, from a very successful family, who basically told me, well, I'm going to vote Republican because that's what my granddaddy does. And so if your granddaddy and your uncle and your daddy are telling you that you're superior, then you're going to believe it as an impressionable young person. So Rick, like you, obviously you believe that land theft, that genocide, that enslavement, that dispossession, these were the religious rights of Europeans. That's what Europeans have typically indicated, that they had the right to do what they did to the indigenous people of this hemisphere. It was their right. It was their privilege. They had the right to enslave Africans and keep us in bondage and sell us off and violate our women and, you know, take our culture and our dignity and humanity. They had the right to do that. But racism also justifies it. It justifies it. It says that the natives and the African slaves benefited. They benefited from this system, this Western civilization, this civilization that came over here. They benefited from being enslaved, from being murdered. from being removed from the land that they were born on, that they owned and loved and worked. That was benefit to the persecuted, benefit to the oppressed. So I'll say this about Rick, and I didn't really mean to talk about him this long. I will say this about Rick. He ought to study a little bit more and introduce himself to history. He ought to introduce himself to the history of this hemisphere. Call it American history if you want to. He ought to study the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas. He ought to study how these ancient civilized people from this hemisphere built temples and other structures, studied mathematics and complex theology. He ought to study how they worked with copper and gold and created artifacts and not just structures, but works of art. You know, he ought to study that. He ought to understand that in a time when Europeans were living in caves, that these people over here, these brown people, the red man as they call them, were doing miraculous things. He ought to study that. He ought to study history. He ought to read about the complexity of this indigenous culture. And how dare he even mention the 10 Commandments from the Bible in his talk. The 10 Commandments and all I could think of when I heard the 10 Commandments was, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, contrasted to what the Europeans did here on this land, to kill and to steal, to violate every commandment that there ever was. So Rick, I don't know if you thought that nobody was going to hear you. And I guess maybe you just thought you were talking to a bunch of other people that were racist like you, and so it wouldn't really matter. And so what you probably want to do is go on over there to Fox, because I certainly hope CNN washes their hands of you. I think you were two-faced anyway. You would talk about Trump to a degree, even though you knew better. You would try to straddle the line, I guess, so you could keep getting that CNN check. But go on over there to Fox. Well, you could lie about history. You could lie about an election. You can lie about anything you want to, and, you know, you'd be right in line with Tucker Carlson and all those other folks over there on Fox. You could be with them, you know, because that's what they're doing. But you've also joined the ranks of the Mo Brooks, Jim King, that was a guy from Iowa, you know. He said, y'all might be all right as long as y'all act like us. That we need to, I don't care who you are, you got to be part of the white culture. Can you believe that? Jim King, Mo Brooks, David Dukes, and some other Klansmen, because that's what you sound like. Strom Thurmond, somebody who in the legislature, in the Congress of the United States, put a racial platform ahead of anything else, while at the same time he slept with black women. So that's a racist. That's a racist for you. That's a racist for you. You're good for some things, but you're certainly not equal. And so Strom Thurmond, Klans people, Fox talking heads, Rick, you're a bunch of ignorant racists and bigots, the whole lot of you. So go right on over there. Be my guest. Hey, I guess it's difficult not to talk about Andrew Brown Jr., another black man killed, murdered, shot 5 times, the last one in the back of the head. You know, back when we watched the Cowboys and Indians, that's what we called them back then. Well, that's what TV called them, and we didn't know any better. But now we know better, so we do better. But back in the day when we watched the old Western films, if you shot somebody in the back, it made you a coward. That meant that that person was fleeing. He was getting away. He was not threatening you. This man was fleeing. He was getting away. He was not threatening the police. He was trying to protect himself. He did not want to be arrested. Who does? So he was not cooperating with an arresting officer. And for that, he was executed. That's twice in 2 weeks that we have almost the identical situation, except in the Dante Wright case, the woman says, well, I meant to tase him, but I accidentally shot him with my gun. And I'm not a gun person, but I can assure you that the weight and feel of a gun is definitely different from the weight and feel of a taser. And any professional law enforcement officer ought to know better without, you should be able to wake them up at 3 o'clock in the morning and put one in each hand and they'll be able to tell you what's what. If they can't, they shouldn't be on the force. But all these, and you saw the video of these sheriff's deputies riding in trucks like gang members. I mean, they were descending on this brother like he was fortressed up, and they were sending a SWAT team like he had a hostage. I mean, this was the way I saw it, and I'm going to watch more accounts of it today. But the way it looked to me, and this is how it landed on me, the way it landed on me is they were going to war. You would have thought they were in a war zone. They were in a combat zone. I mean, they actually had combat gear on. So what they were going to do, and they did it. To shoot a man who's driving in the opposite direction. To shoot somebody 5 times, 4 in the arm and 1 in the back of the head. To shoot a man who was not a violent offender, didn't have any hostages, proved to be unarmed. He was just trying not to be arrested. Trying not to be arrested cannot continue to be a capital offense when you happen to be black. And whether it's right or not, it's still hard to see folks like Dylan Roof captured and coddled. Some people that kill dozens of folks and kill dozens of white folks sometimes, captured with no incident and coddled. But a brother in Minnesota or North Carolina just trying to get away, just trying not to get arrested, is murdered. So call it what you want. I'm sure they're going to call it what they want to. Based on everything I've seen, I see that as murder. And I'll just be honest with you. Even though I appreciate the fact that Derek Chauvin was convicted of second-degree murder, he's facing 40-something years in jail. It doesn't still seem to be enough. It certainly doesn't bring back the person that's dead. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be changing the attitudes of some police officers. And I underscore some, because I don't want to say all police officers. Not all police officers are like that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to believe that most police officers are not like that. But there are enough of them that are, that anytime a black man gets stopped, we got to be cautious of what we do. The kinds of racist, ignorant racist attitudes, like folks like Rick Santorum feed into, that I'm inferior. So for me to be that I'm superior. And so for me to be superior, you have to be inferior. And that my superiority is a God-given right based on my complexion. And your inferiority is something that you are bound to have to deal with based on yours. And so when the encounter is with a black man, then there's this disregard for his life. So a black man whose life is disregarded, who is a marginal person, makes a wrong move in the minds of law enforcement, then law enforcement has taken it upon themselves to become judge, jury, and executioner. So my condolences to Mr. Brown's family. You know, it's so sad that once again, in a matter of days, we keep having black folks murdered by police officers in the United States of America. At some point, those who commit these crimes and the folks that support these criminals must pay. They've got to pay with everything they've got. They've got to pay with their resources in criminal court, and then they got to pay with their lives and time served in criminal court. What they did to this man was criminal on his face. This is Bob Dickerson with In the Black.